Good morning, good afternoon, everyone who is joining. We will give it another minute or two as we allow others to join. So bear with us just a minute as we get started. Thanks. All right, I think the participant numbers are leveling out now, so I think we can go ahead and get started. So hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Yeah, thanks for joining the live Q&A session for the Asia Pacific region and for specifically the 2022 real estate assessment. So my name is Kevin. I'm part of the member relations team at GRESB. Member relations is our semi-new account management team we've set up at GRESB about a year ago. I personally have been at GRESB for almost 3 years now. I started out on the real estate team, so I still have good technical knowledge of the real estate assessment, which is why I'm leading today's session, and transitioned over to member relations about 1 year ago as we started up the team. So I'm also joined by my colleague, Max. So Max, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, as Kevin was said, I'm Max. I'm actually part of the real estate team. I'm with GRESB now for 2 years. So on the real estate team, we are really responsible for the entire content of the assessment, and therefore more than happy to answer all your more technical questions here today.
Great, thanks, Max. Let me make sure the slides are up. So I think we're all set with that. Yeah, so thanks everyone for joining. So a couple of housekeeping. Today's point, of course, why is everyone here? It's a Q&A session for you to ask questions live to us, as well as any of the questions that were sent to us in advance of the call. So please use the Q&A function specifically to ask questions. We also have the chat, but please use the Q&A to post questions. This allows us to better allocate those between myself and Max as we move through the call. Another point we'll make is that the recording of this session will be shared with all those participants who are attending today, as well as all of those who registered. So if you have others from your team who have registered, they'll receive the recording after the call. Great, so I think with that, we can go ahead and get started. So we thought, we'll monitor the questions as they come in, but we thought we'd really preface the call with some of the most frequently asked questions in the assessment. Some of those really have more to do with the entity, basically entity setup in the GRESB assessment portal. We'll run through those. I don't expect it to take more than 5 minutes. Then we'll, go over to the Q&A function to see what have come in. So please go ahead and begin to post those questions in using the Q&A function, and we'll get there once we've gone through some of the frequently asked. So I'll go ahead and start with that. So in terms of access rights, this is a question that's asked by a lot of newcomers, and I'm assuming most of the people who are joining today are probably either first-time reporters to GRESB or have maybe never reported to GRESB previously. So access rights. How do I add, change, or remove users? This is done directly in the assessment portal per reporting entity. So access rights are per reporting entity. There's really no way for us to, aggregate that up to across a manager, for example. So it's simply, within the access rights button of the assessment portal, once you've clicked into the reporting entity. And then as you can see here, this is basically the, this is the area where you can invite new collaborators. So here at the bottom, this is where you can basically add additional users to the individual reporting entity to help contribute in some way. There's various roles: internal contributor, external, investor relations manager, and account manager. With each of these roles, there's different capabilities. So I'll show that in the next slide. A couple of things I do want to note here is the revoke access part. So if there's a user that has left your organization that was there last year, for example, please go ahead and feel free to revoke access. The last one is, of course, manage asset level data. So this basically allows that user to look specifically into the asset portal, manage asset level data, everything from uploading, exporting the spreadsheets, changing values directly in the portal, etc. In terms of the different roles, I won't go through the specific settings, if you want to call them that, for each of the potential users, but this is directly located below where you have invite new collaborator on the last slide. So there's a little drop-down menu where you can see basically all of the various capabilities of each of the different users here. Account managers are basically the main contact of the reporting entity. You can have multiple account managers per entity, so that's definitely something we see a lot. And in the case that we need to contact that entity for any reason, we would of course email all active account managers for that entity. The next topic that I will talk about is real estate templates. So I'm not sure how many of everyone on the line is aware of templates. Templates are basically a very easy and good way to basically copy over responses across multiple entities. As you can imagine, let's say a fund manager is submitting 6 entities to GRESB. From a management component perspective, you would think that typically most of those indicators could be responded to in the same way, if not, very slight differences, as well as some indicators in the performance component. So the template or development component for that matter, the template allows you to basically copy over responses from one to the other. So on the next slide, you can either, there's two main options. You either can create a blank template that you can apply to each of the underlying entities that you have access to. Basically, it's kind of an overall blank template. The other option you have is to actually take an existing assessment and copy that existing assessment into a template and apply that template to other entities. So it really depends on, if you've responded to GRESB before, as you know, and we will discuss a bit today, the 2022 assessment is very much stable year over year. There's just a few very slight changes and really, that we'll go through. But the template, of course, if you've responded last year, it's very easy to basically just take that template, create a new one, and then you apply that to a new entity that you're reporting this year, for example. So this is, again, I'll show you where this is located directly in the assessment portal. It's on the right side. So manage template, it's a good way for, if you're reporting multiple entities from the same fund manager, to save some time during the reporting process. With that, response check, I think Max, you were going to take this one, right?
Yes, absolutely. I can. Thank you, Kevin.
Great.
Yeah, response checks is a special service that we provide together with our third-party validation team, SRI. And response checks are especially helpful for all our new or second-year participants, for example, because in a response check, our validation partner actually goes through your assessment at the point of the response check and looks through it overall to see if there are any improvements. For example, they go through your uploaded evidence documents and see if you fulfill requirements already. They see if you have maybe missed out on certain things you could have answered within the assessment. So it's really overall a check from our validation team to see how to increase your overall reporting when it comes to answering and also meeting our requirements. It's not very important here. It's not pre-validation, so they do not validate already your evidence documents, but it's rather like really a check whether you meet the requirements and give them hints on how to fulfill the requirements afterwards. In case, for example, you have not met certain language requirements, but to that I will come in a later stage as well. And yeah, next one is then, now we come actually to evidence. With evidence, we have always a question, how can I report evidence pieces to funds when I have the same documents or one document for a parent company for multiple funds? Here we can definitely tell you, please upload your documents from your parent company, because these might be applicable to your underlying funds as well. So an example might be, you are CBRE Global Investors as a large fund manager, you have multiple funds reporting to us, and all of your policies are applicable to all of your underlying funds. Therefore, you can then upload these policies to us and state clearly in what way these policies are also applicable to the reporting funds. So there's no need within the documents itself to explicitly have the name of the fund reporting to us being stated. So it's really a way for you to leverage again on your company policies for all of your funds as well. A bit like the template. Next slide. No, the one before. Yes.
Yeah, there we go.
Exactly. Because also another question is that we receive a lot is language requirements. As you might have seen already, our entire assessment is in English. So our assessment language overall is also English. Therefore, normally the easiest way for us would be if all the evidence documents would be also in English, because then our validation partner, SRI, who is situated in the United States, can easily see through your evidence documents and verify your answers against these evidence documents. However, if you have only your evidence documents in Chinese, for example, in Japanese, and you're also maybe not willing to translate the entire documents, we have different tips for you in this case. For example, you can only translate within the document itself the certain passages of the document that are relevant for your answer. Example might be you have an overall ESG policy, and right now you upload this ESG policy for indicator PO1, which is the environmental policy part. In that case, you might only want to translate in this ESG policy the part that has to do with your environmental policies. So really only translate the parts that are relevant to the indicator. What you can also do is you can provide us with a translated summary. So you summarize your document that you upload to us in English on a very short, brief one pager, as long as every single issue that you have ticked within this assessment can actually be seen within this translation. So it's really necessary that every single answer that you gave us within the assessment can be seen within the evidence documents. Third option also might be in every evidence upload, we have an open text box. This can be used to give more context to the evidence documents. For example, if you have like an overall company policy that then applies to other funds as well, so you can use this open text box for this purpose, but also for situational translations in case of other languages of the documents. Next slide. Yeah, and here are just a few more tips and tricks for overall reporting. For evidence, it's really important that you make it easy for us to find the right section. On the previous slides already, you saw our evidence cover page. This is a document that we provide our participants and actually ask them maybe to upload, because on this evidence cover page, you can indicate exactly where within your documents we can find the relevant pieces of evidence. Because for our validation team, it's really hard sometimes when they have a document of 100 pages in front of them to pinpoint exactly where to find the relevant pages or paragraphs. So really, please make it easy for yourself to actually receive the points in the end, and also for our validation partner by indicating exactly where to find the relevant pieces. As I already mentioned, second part, only translate the relevant parts. So this reduces also the reporting burden on you. So you don't have to translate the entire documents, only the parts that are actually relevant to the assessment. And then, as I also mentioned already, make clear that the documents apply actually to the reporting entity. This can be done either by uploading documents clearly from the reporting entity itself, or by using the open text box to give a little bit more context how these documents apply to the reporting entity. And very important, always check our requirements within the reference guide. Under every indicator in the reference guide, we have a section validation, where we very detailed lay out the requirements for each and every single document that needs to be uploaded.
Hey, Max, I'll also add something here. So for the evidence requirements, as Max mentioned, we have a validation section directly within the reference guide. Our partner SRI has really taken a fresh look at these validation sections for 2022. While none of the requirements have actually changed year over year in terms of what needs to be documented, there are some more specific examples that allow you to, they're more descriptive, more examples, give you more context on what's needed. So, if you're a new participant with GRESB, you probably won't notice any differences, and you'll probably think they're hopefully very thorough. But for those that have been reporting to GRESB before that, have always wanted a little bit more context in terms of what exactly we're looking for, definitely check out the new validation sections. I mean, they're not completely overhauled, but there are more descriptive, a bit more content, etc. So that is one thing that we have, updated year over year.
Yes, thanks, Kevin, for a bit more context. Another question that we constantly get is about our GSG emission scopes. One thing here to note is that our GSG emissions are directly linked to your energy consumption that you report to us. So what you can do, you report your energy consumption to us, and then calculate your GSG emissions by using emission factors. This is like how they then get from your energy consumption to the GSG emissions. Then the next question is how to allocate them actually to scope 1, 2, and 3. And there we have in our asset spreadsheet under the instructions tab, and then in the GSG section, this kind of table where we exactly show you for which energy type, meaning fuel, district heating, cooling, and electricity, and the respective floor area types, meaning if you are reporting at the whole building level, then either landlord or tenant controlled, or if you report under the split, meaning base building, which is common areas and shared services, and the tenant spaces. We show you exactly which energy type in combination with which floor area where this energy is consumed should be reported as what kind of scope. An example would be if you have an office building where you use electricity within your common areas, meaning, for example, your lobby. These would be then your scope 2 emissions, as these common areas are always landlord controlled, direct emissions in scope 2 in this case. So this table is really helpful for you to find exactly where to allocate your GHG emissions.
Great, thanks, Max. So I have seen a few Q&As questions come through via the Q&A function. So again, we will indicate directly in the Q&A function when we'll answer that question live. I think if some of the questions are a bit too specific to your entity, we may want to take those offline, but I think the ones that have been asked so far are at least good to go ahead and start with. So yeah, as we run through these, we also still have probably 10 more pre-prepared questions that are frequently asked that we'll run through. But maybe what we can do is just start with some of the first in the Q&A function. Max, do you want to take the first one? And we'll reread the questions for you in the audience, but you also can access them by directly clicking the Q&A function. So from the first one from anonymous attendee, how will optional evidence with no impact to the score benefit us?
Yes, this most likely will refer to our so-called resilience or climate-related indicators, which are our indicators RM5 and RM 6.1 to 6.4. These indicators are indeed not scored this year as well, and the evidence is actually marked as optional. Therefore, here for these indicators, the evidence is purely reporting for reporting purposes only. This means you do not have to upload that evidence. However, in case you share actually your evidence pieces or documents with your investors, this can then further show your investors, if you give them access to these documents, what kind of climate-related processes, risk identification processes you already have in place. So just like for a way for you kind of to show your investors in that case a bit more information than it is relayed within our assessment itself. But this is like really the only thing done with these evidence pieces that are optional.
Nice, thanks, Max. I can take the next one from Himanshu. So question one, for the real estate assessment for new development section, do we need to upload the asset spreadsheet? Technically, you do have the capability of defining the assets directly in the asset portal. It probably depends on how many assets you're reporting for the development component. For example, if you just have one asset that's currently under development, it's probably possible to just do that directly in the asset portal without using the spreadsheet. However, any more than, I would say, 3 assets, it's probably best to go ahead and use the spreadsheet. We do, on the instructions tab of the asset spreadsheet, have basically the exact fields that need to be filled in for development. Of course, for development, we're not looking for energy consumption values or carbon emissions. It's more of just defining the asset, defining the boundaries. Basically, was it ongoing in terms of, was it still being developed during the reporting year? Was it completed during the reporting year? Et cetera. So there are, I would again check out the instructions of the asset spreadsheet. That will tell you the fields that need to be filled out for development. In the case that the asset was both, and I think this is a question we'll handle later, but I think in the case that the asset was both under development and operational during the reporting year, and you were reporting both development and performance components, that asset will aggregate to both. So in that case, if it was operational for 6 months, we would expect those 6 months to have either some type of energy consumption, void consumption in the case the asset is empty. There's probably always something happening inside the asset that needs to be accounted for. So yeah, it would aggregate to both if it was completed during the reporting year and you're responding to both performance and development components. Is there anything I missed there, Max?
No, that was very, very complete. Thanks, Kevin.
Great. Second question from Himanshu. So does third-party assurance help in achieving a better score for the same indicator? So this is indicators MR1 to 4. So basically the data monitoring and review questions that ask, is your energy consumption that's reported to GRESB checked, verified, or assured? And it repeats for GHG, water, and waste. So we have a different scoring methodology for those selections. So if it's just purely third-party checked, essentially someone external to your organization is doing a check of the data that's reported or is part of your annual reporting process. This is basically 1/3 of the potential score for that indicator. If it is assured or verified, you would get full points for the indicator if your evidence is accepted. So there is a scoring difference. I would also recommend, and what I can do is maybe this is something we can share in the email that goes out after, is just to add the scoring document. So the scoring document, if you navigate to documents.gresb.com, this is where you can find the real estate reference guide, all years of the reference guide, scoring document, and assessment. So that's a really good place for you to find this, and scoring document would explain this. So again, checked is, I believe, 1/3, and verified and assured, we do not make a distinction. Various standards use different, some standards are verified, some standards are assured. We've done some research on this, and we've determined, at least for now, that those will remain the same in terms of scoring. Okay, Max, maybe the next one over to you. So
yes.
We have an asset with 3 electricity accounts meters, but we are only able to get data for 2. How do I report the data for this asset and account for data coverage?
Yes, in this case, we have, within our asset spreadsheet, we have the way you report your consumption data is the reporting the consumption itself. And then you have 2 columns called floor area covered and maximum floor area. And these 2 columns are there to actually, in the end, monitor or calculate the data coverage, the area data coverage in this case. So what you can do in this case, you can see the what is the floor area measured, or the consumption for which floor areas with these 2 data meters that you actually have the data for. Example would be you have an asset of 1,000 square meters. Each of your 3 meters account for 1/3 of this. You have now 2 meters with data, 1 meter you don't have data for, meaning you have a maximum floor area you could have collected data for of 1,000 square meters. 2 of these are actually with data. Therefore, your floor area covered would be 666 square meters. And this is how you then can report the data that you collected from these 2 meters to us. And it is accounted for that one of the meters, meaning for a certain part of your asset, you did not collect the data, which is then reflected in your data coverage.
Great, thanks, Max. Maybe the next one from Caroline. So should underground garages be included in the report?
Yes, they should. That's a very short
and
answer.
I'll include this next question with this, or the one on the screen now, because this I think is related.
Exactly. This is a very frequent question we actually get asked as well. So short answer, yes, you should report garages to us as well. And then there are 2 ways. Either your garages are actually sub-metered, so you have metering systems in place, for example, for your office building, and 1 meter for your garages underneath the office buildings. In that case, you can report these two parts separately, meaning you would then report your office building as one asset, and then the underground garage as other and indoor parking, which is another property type that we have within our assessment. In that case, very straightforward. You just report the consumption from your garage under other indoor parking and the consumption from your office under the office building. If there's no submetering between your garage or underground parking and your main asset, in that case, you should report the floor area of your garage together with the main asset and report the consumption of this parking spaces together with common areas. So within our spreadsheet, we have then the base building and the tenant spaces. Within the base building, we have the common areas, and this is where you should then report the consumption values of your underground parking.
Nice. And Max, if you go to the chat, I think it's about the 4th question down, another one from Caroline, and it's so related to parking. So do you want to check that one out? And I think we can probably respond to this one live.
Yes, give me 1 second to read it.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, this is a good one. If you have, in this case, the question is, there are 2 buildings, including 1 underground garage, and under one of the assets, how should this be handled? Then should this be divided into 2 assets, or can it be shown as 1 asset? And then both buildings have different property types. This is basically following the same kind of structure as I outlined before. If you have a submetering for the garage, just split it out. In this case, you would actually then report 3 different assets to us: the 2 main assets plus 1 indoor parking asset. If you have no submetering, and then in this case, since the garage is underneath the 1 asset, you would then report this garage together with the 1 asset underneath which the garage actually is, in the same way as I outlined before, with reporting the consumption in common areas.
Great. Yeah, and Caroline, if you have specific questions about this one, please feel free to reach out to the GRESB contact form. So that's gresb.com/contact. That's for anyone on the call. We have a fully staffed help desk team that is ready to answer any questions. So I can give it a shot with this next one from Miak. So the first question in the Q&A, basically, how do we need to fill out all the fields in the asset spreadsheet to score better points? Can we just fill out scope under whole building or breakdown, etc.? So of course, yeah, great that you're a bit focused on the points, but it's more about data quality and reporting data correctly to GRESB. So we have a very thorough instructions tab of the asset spreadsheet. I would highly recommend everyone on the call, if you're not familiar with that, to spend probably a solid couple of hours really going through that instructions tab. It's extremely thorough, defines basically all the fields that need to be reported, definitions of what tenant controlled versus landlord controlled is, how you should report whole building, whether that's a tenant controlled or landlord controlled whole building. In the end, we benchmark at property subtype and regional level. So for example, office high-rise Asia is benchmarked against office high-rise Asia. Within office high-rise Asia, we have landlord controlled data and tenant controlled data. So depending on whether your tenant controlled data, you're reporting tenant controlled or operational controlled data, that is aggregated into different groups and creates different resulting scores. So again, it should not be about how to really score better. It's about what is actually happening at the asset and making sure that that's reported correctly to us. Really, that's the way your asset is. So definitely check out the instructions tab to learn a little bit more about really how to define spaces within a building and relate that specific to your specific case. Next one, Max. I think so. For public disclosure, is it also a grace period? So maybe I'll back up just for a minute. So public disclosure, and I can introduce it real quick. Public disclosure is for all listed real estate companies globally. So we take the FTSE EPRA Nareit Developed Index, which is, I believe, like 500, 600 listed real estate companies, as well as an additional 100, 150 organizations that are publicly traded real estate. And basically, browse the web, take their data from their websites and pre-populate an assessment. This public disclosure assessment is, it's a service that we provide to our listed investor members. So of course, GRESB, most people here, if not all, are part of the GRESB participant side. You are the information givers. You're submitting information to GRESB. But on the other side of GRESB, we have the information takers. These are the investor members that actually subscribe to our data sets and can access your data. Of course, if you're a private entity, the investor has to request specific access to your entity, which you'll get a notification and you can see those. But if you're a listed company, listed investor members have automatic access to your report. That would be your benchmark report if you participate in the full assessment, or your public disclosure report if you have not participated with GRESB. We still do public disclosure. And Max, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah, grace period does not exist for public disclosure. It's basically, we just map out the full universe, collect your data from what's publicly available on online sources, pre-populated assessment. You do have the option to change that assessment and edit it. We'll be communicating more about that either end of this week or next week. So yeah, stay tuned if you want to edit your public disclosure assessment, but no, grace period does not apply.
That is exactly correct. By the way, just
Great.
On that note, as Kevin said, we will actually send out the official announcement still that the assessments are ready to be reviewed. However, these assessments are already live on the portal, so you can already go in there as of now to review the data we collected for your entities.
Perfect, thanks, Max. Next one. So this is basically, difficulty of collecting environmental data from tenant-controlled data. Of course, I can give a first start, and Max, maybe you want to add anything else. So, of course, this is an issue a lot of participants experience for tenant-controlled data. I think there's various methods as to how to go about accessing tenant-controlled data, whether this is through green leases, information sharing clauses, consistent and maybe a bit persistent follow-ups with your property management teams, your teams directly in the buildings, your tenants to provide that data to you. But how we actually account for this in scoring, as I mentioned earlier, is we do have two different groups of scoring. We have landlord-controlled data that is benchmarked and tenant-controlled data. So you can expect, if you have, for example, 20% data coverage in a landlord-controlled building, your score will probably not be as good if you have 20% land or tenant-controlled data in the same building, because of course the benchmark for tenant-controlled data is just generally lower. Tenant-controlled data is harder to access. So of course, we have hundreds of different benchmark groups depending on the property subtype and region that the asset falls within. But I would say in probably almost all cases, tenant-controlled data is a lower benchmark to achieve. So yes, of course, best efforts to be made. I think over time, everyone understands that data is extremely important for actually measuring performance. To begin, to really measure, you have to, or to begin to manage and improve, you have to measure the data in the first place. So Max, anything else you want to add for that one?
Maybe just a couple of examples. And for example, when it comes to residential as a property type, this is like the go-to example always when it comes to tenant-controlled areas. And as Kevin already mentioned, we only benchmark at the property type or property subtype level even. So since you are always compared to similar assets or funds with similar assets included, you will not be at a disadvantage because all of your peers will have the same kind of difficulties in collecting these tenant-controlled data points. Very important as well is in the construction of our peer groups, we also have one indicator that we look at is whether the majority of your floor area within your portfolio is either landlord controlled or tenant controlled. So if the majority of your portfolio is tenant controlled area, we actually take this into account when we actually also construct the peer group for you. So we only put you into a peer group, or try at least, if there are enough within your peer group, to put you into a peer group with other funds that have mainly tenant controlled floor areas, and therefore, as I said already, have the same kind of difficulties in collecting the data like you have.
Great, thanks, Max. Maybe from the next one about elaborating more on the definition of a tenant-controlled building. Basically, yeah, if tenants have access to turn on and off the light, can we assume our office building is tenant-controlled, even if the facility managers are hired by the owner and managed by the owner?
Yes, this is also a very, very frequent question that we receive. And here, of course, you have not control in this sense over the building on the operational side when you turn on and off the light, because of course no landlord will ever go into an office building and turn off the light after every tenant, meaning the people who actually work there. So what we mean in this case with operational control is that whoever is actually able to implement policies, certain strategies, implement refurbishment plans for the spaces, meaning implement new efficiency measures to increase efficiency of the spaces in question. This is what we mean with operational control, meaning if you have, for example, an example here are often industrial distribution warehouses. These can be probably fully tenant controlled, where then also the tenant who is operating these distribution warehouses has full control over anything that goes on within this distribution warehouse for the duration of the contract. This means they can maybe replace windows, they have new isolations. So everything that goes on within the distribution warehouse was fully in the hand of the tenant for the duration of the contract, and therefore it would then be tenant controlled. Other examples are triple net leases. Or these are then basically often triple net leases, where really the landlord only rents out the space, and after that is completely hands off for the duration of the period of this contract.
Nice, thanks, Max. So I see you've lined up a couple questions, but to give you a break, I think I can answer one of these. So for the question from Lynn on LE6, so I'll go ahead and answer this one. So basically, is promotion considered a non-financial consequence of personnel performance target review, basically for LE6? And can you give some other examples for this kind of consequence? So in terms of a non-financial consequence, I think promotion is a good example. Of course, sometimes promotion comes with financial implications. Sometimes it doesn't. There also can be some type of recognition, be it whether this is an award or something of the sort. I would also encourage you to check out LE6 in the reference guide. Specifically, when you look at the terminology section, there will be a section within that basically describes some examples of a non-financial consequence. I'm 95% sure that we actually added a few more examples this year. So definitely go check out LE6 and the reference guide for some additional examples of what a non-financial consequence is compared to a financial consequence for LE6. In terms of the most used scheme for external assurance and verification for RP1, this is not data that we really, it's not part of our general public output. So I think, there's various assurance and verification schemes that may depend on the specific, locale that you're operating in. Max, I mean, can you think of any that are widely used off the top of your head? I can check, but we're not here to provide an exact breakdown of the most highly used schemes. This would just fall as part of our public output if that's deemed relevant.
Yeah, from the top of my head, I don't have now list in my head, but yeah, this is definitely
okay.
Afterwards, maybe provide.
Sure. So Lynn, if you want to reach out to us about that, please do. Okay, so Max, maybe the top one. So from Anonymous, I would maybe encourage those on the line, if you are paying attention, to go ahead and check the Q&A. It is more of a difficult question, but I think it's pretty relevant. So in terms of GHG emissions, the electricity of the whole building is paid by the landlord, but recharged to the tenant. Maybe I won't read this one. I think that's just getting muddled. So I'd encourage everyone to just check this question out. And Max, if you want to give this a go for it.
Yes, absolutely. So the question here is about what I mentioned in the very beginning as well, how to report GSG emission scopes to us, or how to map your GSG emissions to the different scopes, 1, 2, and 3. And the question here is now about tenant controlled and landlord controlled tenant spaces, and how to allocate the GSG emissions sorry, from these areas to the different scopes. And this is very straightforward, since all emissions that come from tenant spaces, and this is independent from who pays for the electricity, meaning if it either the landlord or the tenant, it doesn't matter. We only look at where the emissions actually occur. In this case, always the question is only in the tenant spaces, and all tenant space emissions are scope 3 emissions within our assessment. So even though maybe the tenant spaces might be landlord controlled, these are not allocated to scope 2 emissions, but to scope 3 emissions.
Great, thanks, Max. Maybe the next one from Caroline. So I think this is just building on what we've been talking about, basically the lack or the difficulty, there we go, in achieving gathering data from your tenants. So if we can't get certain data all together, for example, a single tenant who doesn't give any information, essentially, how do we report this? Do we leave it blank? Do we write 0? Max, go for it.
You do not leave it blank in this case, because we always have to fill out the maximum floor area. So try to make this example very easy. You would report this asset at the whole building level, even if in case, especially when you would have the data. Since you don't have the data for this one asset, you might then still fill in the maximum floor area. In this case, since you report whole building level, maximum floor area should be equal to the asset size. And then you leave the columns or the fields for floor area covered and the consumption blank. This way, our system then automatically sees that there would be the potential for data collection, because this asset still consumes energy, for example, or water. But then calculates based on the 0 floor area covered, a data coverage of 0%. This is how we then report these kind of situations in the right way to us, to actually show or reflect that you weren't able to collect the data for certain areas or spaces.
Great. Okay. I think we've got that one settled. So the next question from Viraj, it's a long question, but I think I can make it more general. So if those want to check it out, please do in the Q&A function. It's the top question at the moment. So this is about specifically residential assets within India, but really this same kind of logic would apply to any residential assets or any type of real estate asset in general. So basically, once the point of where 50% of the assets are sold off from the development team, basically there's a group that's formed that basically helps manage the control of the assets moving forward. And then they've asked, in this case, is it okay to exclude these assets from our portfolio when we have no control? So the idea of exclusion of assets because of control, that is something that's not allowed. If the assets are indeed owned by the fund that is reporting to GRESB, they have to be reported. There's no way around that. It's a bit unclear because in this specific example, if the federation actually begins to own the specific assets, maybe they own their units within a building. But in the end, if you are owning the larger building, the larger spaces, common areas, this falls within your control, regardless of, I guess it depends, but check out the definitions on that. But it depends on the ownership structure. So if we're happy to elaborate this further, if you want to ask us directly, but just reiterating, anything that falls under the ownership of the fund or publicly traded real estate company that reports to GRESB has to be reported. Max, the next one's from Himanshu. I can answer Q3 here. So basically, guidelines on standard documents used for GRESB reporting on individual indicators. So we do provide some examples throughout the reference guide and the validation requirements section. This will be the section that has the most information on basically how to approach documenting. I think if you have specific questions about maybe what's provided, that's something that we could help with via the GRESB help desk, maybe some additional examples, but definitely check out the validation requirement sections first and see what we've got there. Q4, so how shall we report a new development asset? Basically, the base build is completed in the middle. However, there's been a delay in handover and no activity going on. In terms of the development asset, because at least for the first half of the year, it was under development, it should still be reported to GRESB. So it still sits on your on your books. That was developed under your purview for the first 6 months. So definitely check out, or not check out, that needs to be reported to GRESB. Again, if there's a specific nuance that we're missing, please, you can contact us directly. And then the last one on EPDs and HPDs. So environmental product declaration, health product declaration, specifically for DMA 1 in the development component. So basically in India, these are not standard practice yet, and we're facing problems with procuring them. So it's not about losing points. For DMA 1, there's multiple ways to achieve full points for the indicator. This is the same for, I believe, probably every indicator across the assessment, except for probably the performance indicators, where we don't require every single option to be selected to achieve full points. So off the top of my head, I know for PO1, which is the environmental policies indicator, I think there's 10 or 11 options. Only 6 of the options need to be selected to achieve full points. For DMA 1, I'm sure that there's another way of going about that indicator to where you can still achieve full points. Of course, there's different localities. Your peers, probably in the Indian market, will probably have enough developers to have a peer group. They will be facing the same issues. So the investors will see that that's something that's not possible. Of course, you can also communicate this in your own communication to investors, but we're a global benchmark, so we have to look at what industry best practice is. I think over time, there'll be various initiatives that pop up that we need to cover in the assessment. So yeah, definitely see how else you could respond to that indicator whereby you could achieve full points. There's probably a way. Last question, Max. What is the difference between common areas and shared areas? Maybe you just want to refer to the asset spreadsheet instructions.
Yes,
or
absolutely.
If you want to go into the, yeah.
Oh, definitely. I mean, we do have, as Kirby mentioned, in our asset spreadsheet, we have an instructions tab where we describe these two a little bit more in difference, or the difference between these two. However, just a quick example here might be, again, you have an office building. In an office building, your common areas would be the lobby, shared hallways between offices that are not rented out, elevators, escalators. These are all then common areas. While shared services or shared areas could be also encompassing the entire asset, because shared services are a central energy source. For example, it could be a centralized ventilation system. So you have then a ventilation system for the entire building, which is then in that case a shared service by all the offices within the building, and can be then a report under shared services.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Max. The next one I think I can answer. So this is basically about investor access requests, and are there any consequences of not responding to these requests? And then there's a second question that I'll get into. So GRESB investor members have the potential to request access to your reports in the case that you're a private fund. For listed, again, the listed investor members have automatic access to your entity. For private, they have to request access. So from your side as a participant, when they request access, there's no penalty for not accepting that in terms of, for example, scoring or anything else. It's more about communications with that person who requested access. So of course, if they're one of your investors, I'm sure that they'll probably email you outside of the GRESB portal and say, please provide us access, maybe why you didn't respond. But in terms of consequences for not responding, there's none. There might be a follow-up email, or the investor might get in contact with GRESB to help nudge you. But of course, it's your data. It's not their data unless you have agreements to share that with them, or they're your direct investors, and that's part of your deal. So yeah, it's totally up to you to determine how you share your data. If you do grant access, so the second part of the question, they can see the full submission of basically your GRESB assessment. So they can see the benchmark report and the metrics from the benchmark report. Optionally, you can also provide the asset level data to the investor, again, only for non-listed funds. So that's an additional opt-in. When you start your 2022 assessment, you'll see the option to look at the basically to share asset level data if you want to do so. That's also something that can be changed, come October, or really anytime during the reporting year. You can opt into sharing asset level data with investors. So yes, again, up to everyone to determine how they want to share their data. And for non-listed funds, asset level data is also optional. Virage, so you'd be owning less than 50% of, I think it's back to the residential assets. We have a 25% threshold. So anything under 25% can be excluded. If you own more than 50%, it has to be reported. That's a reporting requirements. We're happy to talk with you offline about that one. Chunga, Max, so this one is about the 2021 usage compared to 2020, and basically how COVID affected data. So maybe I'll first kind of back up generally and just note really how COVID affected data. We have this in the assessment now. This year, of course, we are scoring 2020 and 2021 data. These are the most, hopefully the most 2 years affected by COVID, and will really lead to a lot of potential discrepancies or differences year over year in terms of how the data is approached and how the data is scored. What's interesting is we don't have the data yet to understand what those implications will be, which is why we are not going to go ahead and change scoring methodologies behind that. I think it would be, very risky for us to change scoring methodology for data that we don't have yet. And that's not something we'll do after the release, because, you need to know how it's scored way in advance. So again, COVID, it's different countries in terms of how they were affected within regions. It's different property types. For example, residential generally may have gone up in countries where it really wasn't affected and people were going to the office every day. Offices probably stayed quite stable. So and that's the beauty of GRESB, is we benchmark at property subtype and regional level. So we'll be able to account for some of those differences just by nature of the assessment. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this shakes out. But of course, report all of the data that you have. You can report your occupancy figure for the current reporting year, but that's not going to make a difference in terms of the resulting score. It just depends on how the data coverage and like for like happens within your specific property subtype and region. Of course, this is done for each property subtype and region you operate in. So yeah. Realizing we have, just so everyone's aware, we have just 8 minutes left. I think I see 2 more questions that we can look at. And then I think we've got some final slides we want to go through just as a couple of quick reminders. So Max, you want to take this first one on building certifications for standing investments?
Yes, absolutely. So the question here is whether participants would be penalized if they don't have certifications that are awarded at the design and construction phase. Here, this is indicated BC 1.1. Here is to note that our indicators BC 1.1 and BC 1.2 are scored separately at the beginning. However, then the scores are combined and capped at a score of 8.5 points overall. So in this case, you can achieve a certain amount of score for BC 1.1 on whatever part of your portfolio that has actually certifications at the design and construction stage. Then you have a certain part of your portfolio that has operational certifications. These 2 scores are in the end combined together to an overall BC1 score. So even if you don't have, this is like the thing is, the BC 1.2 actually has a maximum score of 8.5 points, as BC1 overall does. So you can actually achieve full score for BC1 without any certifications at the design and construction stage. So in this case, we do not penalize you. However, if you also don't have any operational certifications, then you would, of course, not be able to achieve full score.
Great, thank you, Max. And the last one, so this is the first year that they take part in the assessment. To get scores from year-on-year performance, will I need to upload both 2020 and 2021 data? Yes. So to qualify for like, which is the year-on-year performance metrics, you will have to report both 2020 and 2021. You'll see that clearly defined in the asset spreadsheet. So if you have access to the data, go ahead and report it so that you can qualify for that potential scoring. I will maybe go through the final slides just to make sure we've got time to get through them, and then we can use the last couple of minutes to see what else comes in. So in terms of assessment resources, as a reminder, we have plenty of assessment resources to help you through the reporting process. So the materials can be found at documents.gresb.com, as well as the resources part of our website. So there's everything from reference guides, which, you know, everyone definitely check out reference guide. I mean, it's home base for reporting to GRESB, scoring documents, summaries, assessments in Excel, various aggregation rules handbooks for the, you know, the more technical people that want to understand the aggregation process from asset level to property type level, asset portal validation rules, etc. So a bunch of resources for you to use. So definitely make you know, use of those as you begin to report. We also have a GRESB training platform. So this is really great for newcomers to GRESB. It's probably less useful if you know GRESB. The training platform is it's generally pretty basic in terms of training, but we have a bunch of videos on basically explaining real estate assessment structure, asset level spreadsheet functionality, etc. So definitely check out the assessment training platform. It does have a separate login from your GRESB login, so you will have to create a separate login, but there's instructions on the page on how best to do that. Excuse me. Getting in touch, help desk. So we have our help desk team, which is, I mean, of course, our real estate and infrastructure teams, our member success team, as well as, you know, it can roll up to marketing communications, etc. Our help desk team responds to queries within 1 to 2 business days. So please use the contact form for any reporting questions at any point, really throughout the year. Of course, it does get quite busy over the next couple of months, but we do our best to respond to you within 1 to 2 days. And if for some reason, you know, something hasn't been responded to, please escalate that so that we can make sure it's dealt with appropriately. So yeah, gresb.com/contact. There's also the link here for everyone to use. Let me see just what time it is. Yeah, okay, we've got 3 minutes. Assessment timeline, as a reminder, the portal opened about 3 weeks ago, so on April 1st. June 1st is the response check request deadline. So this is the last day you can request a response check in the portal. For everyone that has already requested a response check or has purchased a response check through the member agreement, we'll be sure to contact you, basically providing you the scheduling link. So because after you've requested the response check call, you still have to schedule the actual call. Basically, by purchasing it, you reserve the right to have a response check, and then separately you have to schedule the call, you know, whether this is in, you know, June 1st, June 15th, last week of June, etc. July 1st, the portal closes. So this is the submission deadline for everyone on the line. July and August, June, July, August-ish, validation happens. Scoring happens in August. September 1st is the preliminary results launch. So this is when you as the participant can log into the portal to ensure that everything seems to be reported correctly. There aren't any errors that you notice or any red flags that you want to bring up to GRESB. This happens for the review period, basically September 1st to 15th. It allows you to basically challenge anything in the report. So yeah, use that to look at the reports. We do a final rerun from September 15th to 30th, and results are finally released to both you and investors on October 1st. So yes, that is the timeline. And I believe that is it. So maybe what we can do, is there the last question, Max? Is that a good one to answer?
Yes, absolutely. I can definitely take this last one,
Okay.
because it's also very common, especially when you talk about phase developments, for example. So the question here is, we have 3 assets reported last year, and 2 of them would like to be combined as one asset with aggregated gross floor areas. How can we do that? In this case, you have 2 options. So to say, either you really delete the last 2 assets, create a new one with a combined floor area, or what you can do is you delete one of the assets, increase the floor area of one of the 2 existing assets, and then report under this asset combined. It might be better in this case, because the second part of this question is, can we have like-for-like performance for this combined asset? In this case, it might be better for you to actually report as a new asset, combine 2020 consumption data together for this asset, for the two parts that it had in 2021 assessment, and then the combined consumption that you had in the year 2021, which is then reported in our this year's assessment. And when you report your consumption data for both years combined, you will then be eligible for like-for-like performance.
Great, thanks, Max. Okay, so I mean, that wraps up our Q&A session. Yeah, we had plenty of prepared slides to take you through, so it was great questions coming in. So yeah, thanks everyone for the contributions. We will send the recording out after the call for those that were not able to attend or want to re-listen to something, but please reach out to us via the contact form on our website so that we can, help you through the reporting period. So yeah, everyone, very good luck over the next couple of months as you begin to report, get your GRESB report started. Yeah, and thanks for joining.
Thank you very much.